gosh, look at the crowd.
Come this way.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
Welcome to LMDtv. I'm Ashwini Vethakan. Joining us on this week's show, we have the President Partner of Heritage Partners, Dr. Arittha Wikramanayake. Welcome to the show this evening, Dr. Wikramanayake. It's good to have you here with us.
Thank you, Ashwini. Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, Doctor, as things stand today, is there a way forward given the standoff between the people and their demands, and the government and politicians in general? Is there a likely scenario that is practical?
I think that's a very, very interesting question. And I must say a very broad question. Okay, I can spend a day explaining my thoughts on that, but I won't. Okay, first and foremost, I think we got to understand that the situation is very, very complicated. Okay. A lot of people, despite all the noise that's been made today, I've been at protests on several occasions. I've talked to a lot of people who are my age and who are much younger to me. And my question is, do they really understand the gravity of this whole thing and the implications of what's happening? Okay, so we got to look at it from various different angles. First and foremost, I think there's an immediate issue, and that is that the people are completely fed up with the president and its cohorts. Their demand is that all the Rajapaksas and their cohorts must go. And I think that's a very, very valid demand, given the level of incompetence, the lack of caring, and the corruption or perceptions of corruption that legitimately surround them. Okay, they have lost credibility, they can't govern, they need to go. Along with that, if you go for these protests and you talk to young people, you will see that there's a general disgust about all politicians. And there's a common refrain that all 225 must go. And sadly, I tend to agree with that. Because no matter, there may be a few individuals in parliament who are excellent people, and I would say not less than 5. But the thing is, because of party politics, they have not been able to actually come out and grab the opportunity. Okay, so it appears that 225 must go. The second thing that we got to understand is, quite apart from changing this government or getting these rogues to go, you also got to understand that there is a financial crisis that the country is facing. And I think that is no less important than changing this government. A lot of people that I talk to seem to think that the IMF will suddenly appear from nowhere, wave a wand, and everything will be paradise again. It won't. The first question is, are we in a position to get a good IMF program in place? Do we have competent people to negotiate that? Do the people who are running government at the moment understand the severity of it? Now, we saw the minister going off to Washington. He created the expectations that he'll come back like Santa Claus with a bag of goodies. It doesn't work like that. And any amateur should know that. So you should not have created those expectations in the first place. Even if you do renegotiate the rest of the debt, which is an inherent part of this whole process, and even if you work out a package, you've got to come out with a plan. And that plan is multifaceted, right? You can't do it overnight. You've got to engage in discussion. You've got to see what is possible. Do we have the resources at the moment to be able to do that? I question that completely. Even if the IMF plan is worked out and negotiated, then comes the next challenge, the implementation of the IMF program. That is what everybody doesn't seem to understand. Implementing an IMF program is a nightmare that we have now earned and which we can't avoid. It is a reality and something we got to accept. But you have to understand that the IMF program, as I said, is a painful process. It will require a lot of things to be done. For instance, we'll have to rationalize the state-owned enterprises, which means downsizing, shutting some of them up. We'll have to remove subsidies, which is going to be a very, very painful process. You're talking about gas, the possibility of gas at 5,000, you probably will be paying 10,000 at the end of it. It's going to result in unemployment. It's going to result in rising costs. Now, no matter who implements this program, you have to understand that 4 months down the road, it will be they who will be the target of all these demonstrations. The Rajapaksas would have gone. You will find, our knight in shining armor who will come along and take over government. But trust me, in 4 months, the demonstrations will be against him. We have very, very short memories, and that's exactly what's going to happen. So as I said, who is capable of managing the process and who is willing to manage the process? If you look at what happened in Parliament over the last couple of weeks, you will see that nobody was willing to come and take on the challenge. Everybody was a pundit. Everybody had their solutions. People had all sorts of magical solutions in their pockets, but nobody was willing to take on the challenge. Various people cited technical reasons for not being able to do so. But let's look at the practical reality of it. They probably didn't want to take it on because they know that if they take it on, that is the end of their political careers. So there lies the problem. So you asked me for my solution. I don't know. My personal view is that nobody in that 225 can take on this challenge and solve it. Mostly because there is a lack of brains. And secondly, because nobody has the will to sacrifice their political careers in trying to take on this challenge, which will probably go on for the next few years. The IMF solution is not a magical solution which can be done in 30 days. It's a long, painful process. So whoever takes it, you have a lot of darlings in Parliament, but those darlings will be the most hated at the end of this IMF program. So my guess is nobody will take it. What's the solution? You might have to find somebody a complete outsider or complete set of outsiders who will come in some form and take on the challenge, who will be willing to sacrifice their careers and perhaps their lives for the country and be willing to leave at the end of the 2 years having done or trying to perform a task which they're given. How do you do it? I don't know. I don't have a magic solution, but one solution may be that a certain number of nationalist MPs resign. You bring these people up, you bring these professionals or these technically competent people who have the credibility and the knowledge to be able to implement this project into Parliament, make them accountable to Parliament and hand over the running of this for the next 2 years to them. I know it might sound a bit of a controversial suggestion, but that in my mind is the only solution if we are going to survive. If you don't find solutions fast, believe me, right, these riots, these peaceful demonstrations are going to turn into riots. When people get hungry, when people are broke, right, they are capable of doing anything. So this is going to change. This will change fast, in my opinion. So I think policymakers, the public, everybody needs to understand the gravity of this situation and try to work out with some solutions that are practical and can be implemented on ground.
Talking about peaceful protests, Doctor, how do you view the inhumane nature of the roadblocks that were enforced by the government authorities on Sunday?
I think the person who came out with that idea is an absolute idiot. Okay, I've been to the protests every evening after work. Okay, because I feel that this government is incompetent, and I'm willing to stand. I'm old, right? I know it's a different generation that takes credit for all this, but 65-year-old old people like me also at that protest. Because we believe in it. We believe that change is required. That gathering is peaceful. You can walk around there without any fear of violence or being abused or being catcalled. You can get into any costume you want to and walk around there. Nobody will even say anything to you. People need to be able to express their ideas and let this pressure off. And if you try to put roadblocks and stop people from coming in, it creates a greater amount of anger. And what did they do at the end of it? They made, those kids walked around town and ended up at the same place, right? You can't stop people from demonstrating peacefully. There's been no violence so far, right? You feel very, very comfortable going in there every day. And look at the images that they sent out to the rest of the world, those barricades with nails, camouflage with black polythene paper. I mean, what are they? Are they animals to do something like that? Are they human in the first place? It raises a lot of questions. How desperate can people be to do something like those? Are kids on the road, right? Do you want to see them impaled on those nails? They just have no heart. And it proves that they need to go. Simple as that.
And how do you view the efforts of our legal fraternity, led by the likes of the Bar Association, in support of the people's movement?
I can tell you with all honesty that during most of my career as a lawyer, I've not ever been proud to be called a lawyer because I know the way people perceive lawyers as being. Sometimes when I say I'm a lawyer, it's more an apology than anything else. But for once, not once, there have been other occasions, but after a long time, I've been proud to say that I am a lawyer. And I applaud the Bar Association for the courage, the wisdom, and the stand that they've taken during this crisis. And again, I think a lot of credit should go to the president of the Bar Association and his committee. They've been absolutely amazing. Salia Pieris is not an extraordinary man. He's like you and me, right? But he's risen to the challenge and he's shown everybody what he's capable of doing. People don't get opportunities like this, Ashwini. It's very rarely that people get opportunities. And when people do get opportunities, they are not big enough to rise to the occasion. Salia and the rest of his team have done that. And they have shown people that you can stand up for change. You can stand up for change with dignity and you can inspire people. And that's exactly what the Bar Association has done. So I applaud what they've done. And they made me feel good to be a lawyer again. And for that, I'm very thankful.
Now, Doctor, what are the main challenges that lie ahead for Sri Lanka's judiciary?
Judiciary is different. You can't conflate the two. You can't conflate the legal fraternity and the judiciary. When you talk about the judiciary is there for several things. I'll break it down into two broad things. One is to be able to administer justice, to make sure that laws are implemented and enforced. The second thing is to provide a forum where people can go and resolve their disputes. They're two different things altogether. When it comes to enforcement, by and large, the judiciary has been okay, except for delays, which are a natural process, which need to be addressed, which haven't been addressed for a long time. They need to be addressed. But by and large, they've been okay. But when it came to political issues, they failed. Again, by and large, they failed. And that is the general perception that the public has of the judiciary. Again, you can't blame only the judiciary. You've got to blame the other pieces that fit into that whole system. The AG's department, for instance. The AG's department, I think they've withdrawn a lot of cases which they themselves filed. The AG has an explanation for it. He said there is no evidence. But the logical question is, if there was no evidence, why do you file the cases in the first place? You don't just go and file a case because some political master told you to file a case. Surely you should have known at the beginning that there was no evidence. So those things should have been factored in. So the credibility in the department has gone completely. There is no doubt about that. But the judiciary is equal to blame because a lot of them have created the perception that they're not independent. Of course, there are the ups and downs. There are times when the judiciary has been a beacon of hope. During that famous 52-day crisis, for instance. I mean, there were some excellent decisions which gave people hope. But again, those are the individuals who are there who made a change. So even during this crisis, we must be fair by the judiciary. They've acted fair most of the time. Okay, and they must be given credit for that. But we also forget another angle. There was another problem that we have because of COVID and everything else. There have been huge impediments to the system working properly. Right? There have been long delays that have been caused to the whole process. So these are things that need to be addressed. And in my opinion, the judiciary has failed to address those issues. Now, there are some areas some courts in this country which hear cases once a year. So think of a land case which comes up once a year. A case would generally be called, say, 20 times. Say. So you're looking at waiting for 20 years to get a solution. People can't wait that long. Again, these are statistics that have been analyzed by various independent bodies. And people do admit that, there is inefficiency in the judicial system. Quite apart from the fact that it creates a lot of inconvenience to the general public, it also has a very high cost to the economy. Because, for instance, if you can't enforce a contract, within a reasonable period of time, commercial players pass on that risk to the consumer. So there's a cost to people. These are people who don't understand. With the improvements in technology, there are things that the judiciary could have done to improve the process, to rationalize the process. And in my personal opinion, they failed in that area. So people need to sit down and think about this and try to improve this system. Okay, but that needs a lot of cooperation because it's not the judiciary can't do it on their own. Every system has a set of checks and balances. There is a system of accountability. So unless lawyers, the public, and everybody else demands accountability from the judiciary, you probably won't see change. So again, a complicated issue which needs to be looked at, and addressed fairly fast, unless you want the entire system to fail at some point.
And on that note, we'll be going in for a short break.
You love the feeling of being renewed. To stay beautiful every single day. To breathe just like we do. Because you are truly delicate. Protecting the ones who've been with us through the years. With Sayalac Care, the only wood coating that truly protects you. Sayalac Wood Coatings from Jat.
Welcome back to our show as we continue our conversation with the President Partner for Heritage Partners, Dr. Arittha Wikramanayake. Now, Doctor, how would you describe the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka Act and its importance?
Well, I think I would hate to be at the Securities and Exchange Commission at this time because there are challenges that nobody would ever have anticipated before. The Securities and Exchange Commission is there to regulate the securities market. They're to act within the framework of a law that has been passed. So basically, that's market regulation. So market regulation, in fact, I've been very vocal on this thing. They passed this new Securities and Exchange Commissions Act, okay, I think at the beginning of this year. Now, the Act has given the SEC very, very wide powers, but I've spoken out against some of these powers for the reason that regulation depends on the regulator. The ability to get people who are mature, who are fair, and who understands issues to be able to work the law. We've been lucky in the sense, again, I'm not shy to say that, we had chairman at the SEC who's very mature and he's been very fair and generally accepted by the industry as being that. The danger is what happens if he goes, right? You put all those powers in the hands of a person who is vindictive, and that has happened before, who is immature, and that has happened before, right? I dread to think what would happen to the market. Our problem is human resources, not laws. You can have any law you want, but if you have a regulator who's accepted by the industry, you can regulate a market without having all these heavy tools. Now, as you know, the SEC has now been faced with a number of issues, now as well as before. When things were going, you found all sorts of new market players like finfluencers, I think they're called. You know, people who drive in the market with tweets and misleading a lot of members of the public, right? My question at that time was, what is the SEC doing about it, right? Because they're misleading people. There's a way of pumping and dumping, right, in a more sophisticated form. So I don't think the SEC was actually equipped to deal with that. I don't think they wanted to crack down on it because they would have been accused of driving the market down. So there's a bit of a dilemma that they had at that time. But what do they do now? There's a bigger crisis now. Markets are falling. A lot of people, a lot of kids and old people have lost all their savings in the market. What do you do in that situation? Right? Their powers are limited because it's only for regulation and not to give any sort of, not to compensate people for what they lost. So I would, they are probably faced with the dilemma on how to regulate it. Now, last week, for instance, they went and suspended the market. I would never have done that if I was there. I'm not saying I'm right. The danger there is that if you suspend a market when times are bad, what's stop another regulator closing down banks, for instance?
A final question for this evening, Dr. Wikramanayake. Could you give us an overview of the trade policies in Sri Lanka and what factors could be considered as trade barriers given the country's current crisis?
Do we have a national trade policy? I think the first question you need to ask yourself is there a national trade policy? Okay, I was involved in the trade negotiations under the previous government, where we started negotiating free trade agreements with Singapore, India, China, and Thailand. Now, during that process, I realized how complicated and complex the negotiation of a trade agreement is. And underlying a trade negotiation is a trade policy. We didn't have a trade policy until it was actually formalized for the purpose of the trade negotiations. But as you will remember, all that entire process was cast aside primarily because of the opposition of one individual who led a large trade union. He probably thought he had 1,000 brains, unlike a former finance minister who just had 7. He scuttled the entire process for narrow personal gains. A national trade policy has to be developed in consultation with all stakeholders. What are we looking at? It can be a protectionist approach, or it can be for the purpose, for instance, of encouraging exports and opening out, creating. What do we need today? The fact is we need dollars. And that's one of the biggest problems we have today. And we see that today. We depend, today, what do we depend on today? We depend on our tea, we depend on the export of our housemaids, and we're depending on our ITs. There is no manufacturing industry worth talking about. And why? Right? We did these comparisons with markets like Vietnam, for instance, and we realized the difference in growth between these markets. They just accelerated ahead, leaving us behind. They started behind us, but they just accelerated ahead of us. Right? In my opinion, one of the main reasons for that is the size of the market. You can't expect people to set up industries here if there is no local market. You need to export. That is the only way that you can grow manufacturing. Okay, and that is one of the reasons behind those free trade agreements. We intended to try to find markets for local industry in markets like India and China. And how? Right? We thought that that if we had these free trade agreements, we would encourage foreign investment into the country, which investment would come because of the attraction of larger markets around us. So we were building towards it at that time. But as I said, that entire thing was scuttled. Now what has happened? Now I noticed a few weeks ago that the government had said that they're trying to fast track a free trade agreement with China. Do our policymakers even know what's going to happen if you start a free trade negotiation with India or China at the moment? We strung those two countries along for nearly 3 years. We had several rounds of trade negotiations. We were about to complete both those rounds. Right? We were about to sign both those agreements. And we had a good deal. Right? We negotiated strongly. We excluded services. We limited the number of items that we opened out on those lists. And after all that, the thing was scuttled. Now, if our government goes back and tries to negotiate with them now, especially in a hurry, all those concessions will have to be forgone. I don't think they even understand the process. These politicians talk nonsense without understanding what a trade negotiation is. They don't understand that you got to build the framework for it. You got to build a foundation for it. You got to strengthen local industry. You got to prepare them for that. They just don't understand. Right? It actually, I have been involved in the process. I've been in government. I've been outside government. And I think I know a little bit more than most of these people on how government and these processes work. These guys are just nuts. They don't understand. And that's what leads you to despair. So we need a complete change in systems. We need to throw these damn politicians out. They are the curse of this country. And until that's done, right, you will not be able to put anything back on track. You have to understand another thing. A lot of people don't understand the implications of that. A lot of kids that you talk, not only kids, a lot of young people and even old people that you talk to today are looking at getting out of this country. Do you realize the impact of brain drain on this country over the next few years? You won't have doctors, you won't have nurses, you won't have IT people, you won't have professionals. What are we going to be left with? And it's not elitism, right? We need these services, to get this country working. I just don't think that I don't know really what to call them, that these people in parliament understand what's happening while they're going to parliament. They talk absolute nonsense. They're either scoring debating points, they're walking in fancy dress. I mean, you see the criticism that they guys say, right? Do something, find workable solutions. I just don't know. So, unless these people understand the damage that they've done to this country and you come out with a workable solution fast, I don't think we are going to have any hope. I've never been this despondent about the future of this country until now. God help us.
Well, this has been a rather interesting conversation, Dr. Wikramanayake, and we wish we could air this show at Gorface Green in the presence of the thousands who are there, and perhaps with the President of the Bar Association in attendance. Thank you for your inspiring insights, and let's hope the struggle continues peacefully so that we see real change.
Thank you, Ashwini. Thank you for having me on. That allowed me to let a lot of pressure off. I managed to get a lot of thoughts off the chest. But you've got to create awareness. You've got to make people understand how desperate of a situation is and the importance of finding solutions fast. Every day that we spend doing nothing or scoring debating points is going to drag this country down deeper and deeper into the pit. There's a saying, when you fall into a hole, you don't dig, you get out of it. And what we are doing today is we are still digging. We got to understand that.
And that's all the time we have for you this week. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.